Senator Simons.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I rise today to speak at third reading of Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act. And as Senator Pate did just before me, I want to thank all the members of the Human Rights Committee, including the bill's sponsor, Senator Wells, for their dedicated work on this legislation. They came back to Ottawa during a break week for 2 full days of hearings and then held an extra meeting to hear another 7 hours of testimony last week. It was not easy testimony to hear. Some of it was legal and technical, but other witnesses spoke with pain and power about the discrimination and violence they and their communities have endured. So I want to express my gratitude to all the members of the committee for going above and beyond in their study of C-9. The bill basically falls into 3 main parts. One deals with hate propaganda, including the display of hateful symbols, including the Nazi Hakenkreuz, as well as the Nazi SS Thunderbolts, the Zabelzikrun. And it now also, of course, includes the display of the noose, the noxious symbol of lynchings in the American South transplanted here. Also included are any symbols associated with the long list of groups on the government's terrorist watch list. The second element of the bill creates a new secondary hate crime offense to be attached to any crime motivated by hatred, which would dramatically increase the potential sentence for those found guilty. People have tended to call this a standalone offense, but I prefer to think of it as a stand-beside offense, since it must be connected to the conviction of another crime. The third element deals with efforts to obstruct access to places of worship, cultural centers, cemeteries, and educational and seniors facilities where targeted minority groups might gather, and with efforts to intimidate people from attending such places. Now, the goals of C-9 are laudable, especially at a time when Canada's entire social media ecosystem is being filled with toxic hate mongering, more and more of it AI-generated. There's a 24/7 cacophony of disinformation and bullying designed to poison our community concord. But the evidence heard by the committee was not just mixed, it was conflicted and at times deeply ambivalent, as many thoughtful witnesses raised serious concerns that the bill, however well-intentioned, could trespass on constitutional rights to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly. Let it be said, many witnesses spoke strongly in praise of the bill, and for me, some of the most compelling testimony came from Stephen Camp, a retired member of the Hate Crimes Unit of the Edmonton Police Service, who now serves as the project director of the Organization for Prevention of Violence's Hate Crime Center. Mr. Camp spoke clearly and urgently in favor of the new hate crime offense. And I'll quote from his testimony. "This renders Canada as a world leader in combating hate crime, and the benefits make it a force multiplier, enhancing democratic principles, freedom, safety, justice, and understanding," Camp told the committee. The benefits include an improved response to public safety, a recognition of hate crimes' harm and its affront to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the understanding that the government takes this dehumanizing, destabilizing, and corrosive crime type seriously. Naming the harm matters, he testified. Several Jewish groups also offered powerful testimony about the corrosive, terrifying rise in anti-Semitism in Canada and the potential for C-9 to respond to that crisis. Let me quote from the presentation of Jamie Kurtzner-Roberts, the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Quote, "We are seeing hate crimes remain underreported, underinvestigated, underprosecuted, and too often undersentenced. In many cases, the criminal code does not adequately capture the unique harms of hate-motivated conduct or provide sufficient clarity on how these offenses should be prosecuted," she testified. "We have seen the consequences of this clearly. In a case I was involved with last spring," she said, "an individual from Newmarket plotted to bomb synagogues across Toronto in order to, in his words, kill as many Jews as possible. He was convicted only of uttering threats, and his punishment was 60 days of house arrest. For communities already living under threat, outcomes like this are devastating. They undermine confidence in the justice system," she told the committee. But other witnesses, including those who represented the very minority groups which are too often the victims of hate crimes themselves, were far cooler in their praise, raising repeated fears that parts of C-9 could actually backfire and be turned against them, and that it could, in fact, undermine civil liberties that have historically protected them from persecution. Balpreet Singh is the legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada. On the one hand, he testified, his organization's recent study of anti-Sikh hate in this country found, most disturbingly, that 65% of respondents across Canada had experienced anti-Sikh hate. On the other hand, though, he expressed concerns that portions of Bill C-9 could undermine lawful political expression, peaceful protest, and religious freedom. Quote, "One of the most important things this committee should understand is that Bill C-9 has already become the subject of a widespread Indian disinformation campaign targeting Sikhs in Canada," he testified, noting that several major Indian media outlets have already claimed, erroneously, that C-9 was designed to crack down on Sikh groups in Canada. Quote, "These reports falsely suggest that Canada introduced Bill C-9 under pressure from India to target Khalistan advocacy in order to mend diplomatic ties with India, and has, in effect, banned the display of Khalistan flags or pro-Khalistan imagery. The goal of this disinformation is to create fear and suspicion around pro-Khalistan advocacy in Canada and in the community," end quote. Mr. Singh also testified that Sikh activists in Toronto were already feeling the repercussions of C-9 even before it had passed. The issue, he explained, was in part the use of an important Sikh symbol, the khanda, which is used by all kinds of religious and cultural groups, but which is also incorporated into the iconography of some Sikh extremist groups that are on the government's official list of terrorist entities. There's also been confusion about the flying of the Khalistani flag. And again, I quote from Mr. Singh. "On April 26th of this year, Sikhs had their annual Khalsa parade in Toronto. The organizers and the WSO received numerous inquiries from the Sikh community members asking whether Khalistan flags had become illegal under Bill C-9, Mr. Singh said. We also became aware of an incident at Nathan Phillips Square where a Toronto police officer reportedly advised members of the Sikh community present that Khalistan flags would not be permitted because Bill C-9 had now passed. Although this misunderstanding was eventually corrected, it demonstrates the confusion and fear that vague legislation combined with foreign disinformation can create," he continued. I must say his words have resonated with me ever since. Some representatives of the Muslim community expressed parallel concerns. Noura Fatilapour is the legal counsel for the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association. Islamophobia, she acknowledged, is a huge concern for her community. Muslims, along with many racialized and marginalized communities, know both the realities and dangers of hate firsthand, she testified. Many Muslims are targeted not only because of religion, but also because of race, ethnicity, language, and dress, and non-Muslim minorities can be targeted when perceived as Muslim. And yet, she called on the committee and the Senate to reject Bill C-9 in its entirety because of its erosion of civil liberties. Quote, "Bill C-9 will not make our communities safer. It will instead likely increase over-criminalization of marginalized populations, encroach on political expression and constitutional freedoms, and cause an overall chilling effect that will deter long-standing traditions of democratic civic engagement on political and social issues. That will not make our communities safer," she said. And while several Jewish groups spoke passionately and eloquently in support of C-9, especially in this time of vicious anti-Semitism from both the right and the left, the Jewish community is in no way united on this issue. Not surprising, perhaps, in a culture that celebrates and prizes debate. As the adage goes, when you have two Jews, you have three opinions. A coalition of 5 progressive Jewish groups, if not now Toronto, Independent Jewish Voices, the Jewish Faculty Network, Jews Say No to Genocide, and the United Jewish People's Order, presented their own brief to the committee, and I will quote from it. "Much of the talk around this bill has been about addressing anti-Semitism," they wrote. "We know anti-Semitism is real and linked to all other forms of oppressive systems. We also know that criticism of the State of Israel is not inherently anti-Semitic, nor is protesting corporations, institutions, or individuals who have directly supported the Israeli government or who seek to silence pro-Palestinian movements. Bill C-9," they continued, "imposes severe consequences for protest activities, language, and visual displays. The language of the legislation means that police will be enforcing a law based on their perception of people's intentions. For example, the legislation says it should apply when actions are motivated by hatred and or when there is intent to provoke a state of fear. This leaves a lot of room for bias to influence enforcement." And in much the same spirit, Eric Freeman, lawyer for Egal, reflected on the strengths of the bill and its potential problematic aspects for the queer community. Quote, "The bill offers meaningful advances. The standalone hate crime offense carries genuine symbolic weight, and naming the harm matters for data collection and nationally consistent reporting," he told the committee. "Our primary concern," he's continued, "is with the intimidation and obstruction offenses, which remain overly broad and vague and which grants significant discretion to law enforcement, discretion that risks inconsistent application, creates uncertainty for the public about what conduct is prohibited, and opens the doors to potential abuse. He went on, and I'm going to quote him at some length because I think this is powerful testimony. On our reading of the bill, if a church or community center allows an anti-queer extremist speaker to use their space, nonviolent 2S LGBTQI protesters could be charged with a hate crime offense simply because of the speaker's chosen venue. Unlike bubble zone laws, these new offenses provide no clear guidance on the conduct they criminalize. On hate symbols, I note that the offense also covers any symbol associated with a terrorist entity, and that list can be expanded by future governments through a process that lacks transparency and offers limited avenues for challenge. For 2S LGBTQI communities, this matters. Our symbols, the pride flag, the lambda, and the pink triangle, are used for connection, inclusion, and protest. However, in a political climate where there are increasing calls to label trans organizations as terrorist entities, the listed entity provision could put our communities at risk, he concluded. Now, these are very serious reservations, my colleagues, voiced by serious people, the very people C-9 was meant to protect. And I think they should give us serious pause. The need to combat hate is real and urgent, but we are running a very real risk of creating a tool that could be weaponized in future against vulnerable communities. Have we struck the right balance between protecting the community and protecting charter rights and civil liberties, especially our most fundamental rights of freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and freedom of assembly? I am not convinced that we have. And yet, I am certain that we stand in this moment at an existential crossroads. No one in Canada can doubt the need for us to be combating hate in this critical moment in our political history. In my beloved home province of Alberta, we've seen a number of disturbing violent incidents where racial hatred appears to have been a motivating factor. And perhaps that's not surprising, given the way the government of my province has been drumming up resentments against immigrants and refugees and Indigenous peoples of late. When our own elected leaders engage in race-baiting rhetoric, when they pit Albertans against one another, they create a fetid environment wherein hate and hate crimes can flourish. 30, 40 years ago, it was far-right extremist groups, neo-Nazis and white supremacists, who presented the greatest danger to peace and order. It was hate-mongers like the Aryan Nations, the KKK, Jim Keegstra, who kept me up at night in Alberta. And I was deeply grateful to the good government of Premier Peter Lougheed, which set out to combat hate in all its forms. In 1972, the Lougheed government passed Alberta's first Bill of Rights and established the Alberta Human Rights Commission. In 1983, in response to the Jim Keegstra scandal, the Lougheed government established a special committee on tolerance and understanding, led by then MLA and future Senator Ron Gitter, to investigate racism and bigotry in Alberta schools and Alberta society. However worried I was about right-wing hate groups in my province, I felt confident that my government was committed to fighting discrimination and hate and championing an inclusive and tolerant society. Today, it is my home government in my home province itself that seems most keen to stir up division by scapegoating immigrants, refugees, and temporary foreign workers, most recently with a series of 5 mischievous and malicious referendum questions. These are loaded push-poll type questions, carefully crafted to inculcate resentments of newcomers and to build a case to deny them services to which they are legally and constitutionally entitled. They don't just pander to populism. They actually attempt to rile up Albertans who may support immigration by creating a false narrative that new arrivals, be they from overseas or from other provinces of Canada, are taking their jobs and stealing their social benefits. Today, it is the government of Alberta that is attacking the rights of trans and queer teens in order to make classrooms less safe and less welcoming, whether by invoking the notwithstanding clause to out kids to their parents or by banning, outlawing pride rainbow flags in schools. Today, it is the Alberta government that is championing the idea of rolling back treaty rights and railing against the duty to consult, as political leaders blame First Nations communities for opposing separatism and legally thwarting a true separatist referendum. Today, it is the Alberta government that has consistently mainstreamed and normalized right-wing extremists and given a platform to those who want to break up our country while simultaneously attacking Indigenous rights, women's rights, and the very existence of racialized Albertans. Alas, Bill C-9 cannot help us tackle the challenge of politicians who weaponize hatred, whether they are doing it for ideological or strategic reasons. Perhaps, though, C-9 can help us, at least somewhat, to deal with the dangers and consequences of this kind of stochastic terrorism, to denounce hate crimes when they happen, and perhaps, if we're lucky, to deter them before they occur. But the real problem, my friends, is that we cannot police or legislate our way out of hate. What we need is tolerance. What we need even more is understanding. What we need are leaders in our cultural communities, in our houses of worship, in our city councils, our legislatures, and our parliament to stand up for justice, for freedom, and, well, for love. We must stop giving into the temptations to demonize or scapegoat those who are different from us, to blame them for our own economic and social frustrations. We must stop being seduced by polarizing polemic and fight for a Canada where we're all treated with equality and inclusion, where we celebrate our difference and understand that it is those very differences, that glorious diversity, that gives our country its strength and which makes Canada a moral beacon to the world. And we must be a Canada that works harder towards reconciliation, which begins by an acknowledgement and a reckoning with the tragic intergenerational legacy of residential schools. Most of all, we must not let the forces of discord delight in turning minority groups against one another. This is a moment when Canadian Muslims and Canadian Jews of goodwill must stand together against xenophobia and bigotry. When Indigenous and immigrant communities must stand together and not let resentments or suspicions divide them. Where the diverse South Asian community must unite against white supremacy, whatever their individual religious and cultural differences. When religious minority communities and the queer community must stand together and see that they have more in common than what divides them. When trans activists and feminist activists must make common cause against misogyny and prejudice. And for those of us in this Senate, in this marvelous, multicultural, polyglot community that we share, I say, let us be our best selves. Let us not be comforted or satisfied that fines or arrests, especially as our primary mechanism, can ever end hate in our country. Let us each and every one of us here in this chamber sally forth instead to champion the true values of this Canada, this country, that we love and that we are all so honored to serve. Thank you, merci, and hi-hi.